once again, somebody tweeted me. And the way that this came up was somebody tweeted me a clip of a guy giving another guy the Death Valley driver. You know, the thing where they're up on the shoulders and you turn them over and boom.
Sure.
A Death Valley driver on the apron of the ring at some fucking show. It was just a 10-second clip. And Jesus Christ, this fucking guy that was giving it, which I tweeted, I said, the guy giving it doesn't have any idea what he's doing. He didn't tuck the guy's head over, dropped him straight on his head on the apron of the ring. It was I couldn't believe that the guy was not seriously injured. And then just dropped him off, and then he just bounced off to the floor, but pretty much head first. But in hindsight, the guy taking the move was like 160 fucking pounds. So if he'd have been a full grown man, it would have killed him. But anyway, so I tweeted that. I said, stupid move on both parts for a pop on an Outlaw show. Well, several people tweeted and said, that was Rev Pro, not some Outlaw show, which I guess Rev Pro is one of the promotions in the UK these days. I couldn't see it, couldn't see the crowd either way. I just assumed that two guys that looked like, junior high school kids doing stupid moves on a ring these days. It was an Outlaw show, but if Rev Pro is a legitimate show, I apologize there. But it comes to find out the guy giving the goddamn fucked up Death Valley driver is the same guy who gave that Leo Rush the power bomb off the top of the ladder through the table that he popped up and didn't sell. So this guy apparently makes his reputation is Janela or somebody I found out I blocked him a while back, not knowing he was one of the boys. He was just tweeting more of that stupid Outlaw wrestling bullshit, right? So I blocked him anyway. So I guess we'll never see eye to eye. But anyway, so it's the powerbomb guy is also the Death Valley driver guy. And one guy, so several people, Rev Pro, okay, if it's not an outlaw show, I apologize. But one guy said, well, what's an outlaw show? We've come to this, Brian, that people can quote you who wrote the TV that led to the pay-per-view where they did the controversial finish come up with by Booker so-and-so, but we've lost them at Outlaw Show.
Not too long ago, a question came into the drive-thru, and I'm debate, like, do I read this on the air or not? I mean, it's a simple little quick question, but is it just so rudimentary? Is it so elementary that I read it? But it was, what's a dark match? And I'm like, come on, this can't be a serious question. But it seemed like it was a serious question. And
well, but actually, to branch off of our topic for a second, it is serious because I swear to God now, they have dark matches on shows that it has been so lost as to what that actually is. They now call a dark match anything that goes on before the regular show. So the pre-show matches are also dark matches in terminology in the locker rooms these days. Folks, in case we've lost you again, a dark match, the term was coined probably in the late 70s, early 80s. It might have been Vince that did it. As a match that is at a television taping but is not taped is a dark match. Actually, no, it may not have been Vince because back in I remember the Memphis TV days when it was an hour and a half show in Memphis but only an hour everywhere else, they would write dark on the segments that were only for Memphis and tape on the ones that went everywhere. So it was an industry term. But a couple of things are implied. Number one, it has to be a TV taping first before you can have a dark match at it. If it's not a TV taping, then technically they're all fucking dark matches. Einstein's. And secondly, there in my mind is no such thing as a pre-show match because if you have sold tickets to a show, open the doors to that show, and let the people in, then whatever you start with is part of your fucking show. And that's the first thing I did in Ring of Honor was try to get rid of pre-show matches, which was a habit of theirs also. But it was always the school guys or it's the guys that helped and they deserve a chance to. But no, you don't start off a major league entertainment program of any kind. You don't start off a Broadway play with now here's the kids from Connor Elementary that have a fucking drama class and they're going to do 15 minutes for you. And then the nationally known Broadway stars that you paid to see are going to act for you. It's the same goddamn principle. You don't put the most inexperienced, the most unknown wrestlers that the people will see that night on first before they see anything else, whether you've turned the lights down or not. And then let them do a bunch of fucking shit that the people halfway will see through, and then have your stars come out and do the same kind of shit. Do you see the logic in that, Brian?
I see what you're saying, yes.
So at any rate, now that we've branched off our original topic, an outlaw show, in the days of territorial wrestling, the territories, and we've heard Ron Fuller say it, by necessity, were monopolies. They were monopolies in their market, and the wrestling business was controlled by the cartel of promoters across the country. And whether they were doing it to fuck the boys is another topic that we can have for another day. But they were doing it to fuck the outlaws, because history had shown over the long haul. Now you get a promotional war hot, like Indianapolis versus Detroit, Sheik and the Bruiser. 72-74, and both towns will sell out for a while. Or Atlanta, 72-74. They had a lot of problems in those days.
Montreal, same period.
Montreal in the early 70s, because wrestling was in a boom period that people have forgotten about in the early 70s in a lot of places. But that is in large part an exception. When you have a war where both sides are doing sellout business, that was because of circumstances that didn't normally come together and take place for those promoters to be fighting each other. But normally what you had when you had an outlaw promotion, a secondary promotion in town, was you had opposition to the established promotion in the form of a bunch of guys who couldn't get booked in most places. That's why they were termed outlaw guys, because for one reason or another, they'd got sideways with enough promoters that just quit using them, that they got a grudge and decided to work for the fucking outlaws because at least they'd pay them. That's about where those guys were in a lot of cases. Or it would be locals that could run where they lived and did it for the glamour of it. And then they would use some of those guys on their cards maybe. But outlaw shows were generally, and not just low budget, because there's been some great, all wrestling in those days was low budget. And there's been some great wrestling in Memphis and Mid-South and et cetera, et cetera. It was done on a low budget. The outlaw shows were not only usually low budget, in a lot of cases they were no budget. And it looked like it. And the wrestlers looked like it. And the fact that you had never heard of a lot of them, or if you've heard of some of them on the show, it had been years before that. That was a tip-off. And a lot of cases, they relied on guys that they'd just broken in themselves. On an upcoming episode of The Experience, we'll hear Ron Fuller tell about the time back in the 30s when they picked up a hitchhiker to fill out a tag team match. But it was outlaw wrestling was anything of that flavor and nature. And they did also because they didn't have the status of being the promotion in town or in the area with the TV or with the connections at the newspaper or the radio stations. They'd go out and flyer bullshit. That bullshit. East Tennessee is full of outlaw mud show. That's another. Outlaw was an industry term, but mud show became a Southern term, because a lot of the shows were being held in fairgrounds and actually the ring might be set up in the mud. So mud shows. East Tennessee is full of them today, and pioneered by the Ernest T. Bass down in Knoxville is the worst outlaw mud show promoter of all time. But it was started with Jack Pfeffer. He ran outlaw. He ran opposition. That's what it was. It was an outlaw promotion, but when the booker of it or somebody involved in putting it together would call the boys that they were close to try to get them to come work, they'd say, "We're going to run opposition to Fritz in Dallas. Don't tell anybody, but it's going to be a big deal. We're going to put them out of business." Trying to get them to come work for them. It was always come work for the opposition. We got something big going on. Anyway, the Jack Pfeffer with the freak shows, the Angel, or the goddamn bald lady wrestler, or the Bruno San Martino and Hobo Brazil. That was outlaw shit when you make up the fake names confusingly similar, or the alligator wrestling or whatever the fuck that became a fad at whatever point. It was viewed as outlaw after a while because that it had to be so sensational. They had to make up for their lack of promoting skills or lack of talent on the card with either going to the newspaper and exposing the business when they couldn't take over the town, Jack Pfeffer, who was the ultimate outlaw promoter for a long time, or just doing anything to draw attention. And so in the business, if somebody looked if a guy, his gear wasn't clean, or now they don't have gear at all, they're wrestling in fucking bike shorts and t-shirts or whatever, it looks outlaw. Or if you're wrestling in a tent set up in a goddamn parking lot, it looks outlaw. And I've done these things, and I've run some of these shows, and I admit they looked outlaw. But it is now, I guess the modern equivalent is the hardcore wrestlers. So they just put on the internet, somebody's going to have a 10,000 thumbtack match or whatever. Good for them. I hope they get hepatitis and fucking rot from the fucking inside out. I don't care. But that's outlaw, all this hardcore bullshit that appeals to a small audience with sensationalism. Somehow they feed a need to be somebody, or, you know, it's an outlaw show when it's just a bunch of guys in fucking no gear that don't look like athletes, never seen a fucking tan bed, are flipping each other around with their dicks because that's what people do these days, or the ring falls apart. They used to have an outlaw. Christine Jarrett she'd say, well, they belong with Don Pruitt and the rest of the outlaws down there in Bowling Green. That's the only time she ever got mean, was when she talked about the outlaws. Or, you know, or Jack Pfeffer. She threatened.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Him one time. Actually, he made a note of it, and it's preserved in his papers because he was having a fight. He was going to come into Nashville and expose the business if Nick and Roy didn't use his girls or his talent or whatever. And Christine Jarrett in a private meeting said something to the effect of, probably, you're going to mess around and get killed. And I don't think she threatened to do it herself, but she may have felt like it. But at any rate,
but it worked.
But yes, and he left town. But she would say that Don Pruitt down in Bowling Green, or they had an outlaw group in Georgetown, Kentucky, for years, 10 miles outside of Lexington, right? And the big name, and he was an outlaw icon around West Virginia and Kentucky and Tennessee. And anytime there was an outlaw promotion for years, he's a part of it, was Dale Mann. Big Dale Mann, and I think it was Dale TNT Man, but another one of their stars was Bulldog Cliff Lilly, and there were people, you know, Dale Mann wanted to be the big promoter, and I'm sure he paid the local guys peanuts because they could walk around and say they were wrestlers. Bobby Fulton even worked there when he was just breaking in, like 16 years old. They booked him from Ohio, but it was at the Country World Convention Center in Georgetown, which was literally a barn that had never held livestock, but they put a barn up with a cement floor to have country music acts. There were no seats. You just had chairs or whatever the fuck, country music acts on Saturday nights and dances. And they would have wrestling once a week there at this and draw 100 people. Or when Lexington Rupp Arena, when Jarrett's business got going, I think they might have gotten up to 150 people. They put an ad in the paper Sundays next to Jarrett's. But at any rate, this fucking barn, it had cardboard cutouts of guitars with glitter on them pasted on the walls. And they had one concession stand that was like the cart that they have at the outdoor fair that was wheeled over in the corner. And you know, but the Outlaws ran there, and she, you know, that's what she would, because it was bad for business when people saw that shit. If they wandered into it thinking it was wrestling and saw a bunch of guys didn't know what they were doing or just getting in the way of shit, you know, that's why there was a monopoly. But yeah, Dale Mann was not a popular person.
Hey, Jim, can I jump in here?
Yeah.
It's funny you bring this up. I was going to say it later on during my plug, but on this week's Super Podcast, Bobby Fulton's my guest, and we kind of just have a free-flowing conversation. We touch on everything from Andre the Giant to World Class, and somehow we ended up talking about Dale TNT Man. I asked him about it.
So 3 people have mentioned Dale Mann's name in the last fucking 5 years, I guess.
He told some pretty crazy stories about him. So after I finished recording with Bobby, and again, this is on this week's Super Podcast, I went and I Googled like Dale Mann just to see like what else I could read about him, because I didn't know too much about him other than I knew the name. And do you know much about him? Do you know much about Dale TNT Man?
I never worked with him. I don't know that I ever met him. I remember, and this was back from when I was a fan, seeing his name on a lot of the, like I said, the Outlaw wrestling newspaper ads that you would see from time to time. And I know from seeing results and everything, he would work small shows in West Virginia and Kentucky, and he had a promoter's license in Kentucky at one point, which meant that he would get figured into a lot of other mud shows that people wanted to run because they could use his license back when it was less strict. But I don't really know much about him past that.
Yeah, either did I. So I Googled his name and I was thinking like, something from Wrestling Classics or some sort of wrestling message board would come up. But instead, is Burkesville a town in Kentucky? Is that a town you know?
I think it's a small one, I believe.
Cumberland County?
Okay, yes, that's even smaller, and it's that, yeah.
Well, here's like the local topics. A lot of communities have this where people could report on news or correspond with other local civilians and get news. And here's a whole forum about all the people that Dale Mann allegedly killed. And it appears his daughter has jumped in on this thread and is now fighting back at people. I mean, this is old. This isn't current. But, yeah.
When was this from?
Began in 2009 and it's still going here's 2011.
Good God. Was he charged with this? What are these allegations?
I don't know. Who did he murder? A guy called Butch. I believe if you check back a few years, you'll find that he has killed more than one and got away with it. And then there's other people chiming in. And then here's his daughter. What does she say? Look, you stupid ass people who have nothing else better to do than sit on your fat asses and talk shit about people just because you're jealous of what he has done in his life. And he did kill that man because he was protecting his family.
What?
Okay, so there's the admit. And he would do it again in a heartbeat for them. And if that sounds like a child molester, you guys, I don't know what's going on here. This is insane.
I'm sure that Dale Mann's defense attorney appreciates. Is he still alive? This was 40 years ago. He was on top of the wrestling world.
I believe he died, which is probably why I feel safe in reading this on the air.
Okay.
But, I'm looking at other things here. It appears that he may have killed a few people. I don't know the circumstances behind it or anything else, but,
we can't prove it to be true, but a lot of people saying it is what you're saying.
There's a whole lot of people online.
A lot of people saying it. Well, there you go. Well, take that for what you will, folks. Don't fuck with Dale Mann. I still would take Christine Jarrett over Dale Mann, and if she got the grip on him. Anyway,